This is the hidden threshold, a quiet crossing, a place where practice deepens and belief is examined from the inside. Here, we explore devotion without dogma, discernment without dismissal, ritual without performance, not as instruction, not as certainty, as a lived, evolving path. I'm Veyrin Vale. Let's begin. There's an intimacy to practice that's hard to describe. It's a kind of quiet ownership that isn't about secrecy, but about belonging. Practice, in its truest form, belongs to you alone. No one's monitoring the hours you put in or keeping track of your attendance. There's no scorekeeper or expectation of progress updates. If you set your practice aside for a week or even longer, the world continues on, undisturbed. Nobody knows, and truthfully, nobody is waiting for you to return. It's just you, in whatever space you've carved out, connecting with something that matters. Something you may not even have words for. Maybe it's a habit, or a prayer, or a craft, or just simple quiet. The relationship is direct and unmediated. No intermediaries, no audience. Just you and the practice, meeting each other anew every time. Lately, I find myself reflecting more and more on what this kind of solitude really means. Because so much of the spiritual journey, or any committed work, is shaped by being with others. We gather in circles, share rituals, create meaning through conversation and shared experience. There's a rich energy in that, and a resonance that comes from being seen and accompanied. Community can hold you up, inspire you, challenge you, and help you see facets of your own journey that might otherwise remain hidden. The collective rhythm can pull you through the dry spells and give you language for what you're experiencing. But there's another current running alongside all that. There's the practice that happens when the doors are closed, when the world is silent, and you're left only with yourself. These are the moments that don't get photographed or posted, the rituals that remain invisible to everyone but you. Sometimes these acts are so deeply woven into daily life that you hardly even notice them yourself, and yet they persist, quietly sustaining you beneath the surface. I've lived both sides of this, the communal and the solitary, sometimes in the same season, sometimes shifting from one to the other. And every time I'm struck by how profoundly different they feel. It isn't a question of which is better or more authentic. They simply offer different gifts. Community brings you out into the open, helps you see yourself through another's eyes. Solitude draws you inward, strips away the need to perform, and lets you find the pulse of your practice without interference. There's a real transformation that happens when practice is private. The inner critic, so often fueled by imagined witnesses, loses its grip a little. You stop measuring your actions against any standard except your own honest presence. The subconscious, or conscious, desire to impress or prove something begins to dissolve. What remains is a kind of distilled attention, a rawness that can be both liberating and unnerving. There's clarity in it, but also vulnerability. Sometimes you discover things about yourself you'd rather not see, or realize you've been holding on to certain rituals out of habit rather than devotion. There's a freedom here, though. When you practice for no one but yourself, you're free to fail, to stumble, to start over as many times as you need. The process becomes more about showing up as your authentic self rather than about making an impression. You begin to notice what truly matters to you, not what you think should matter or what others say is important, but what actually brings you alive. That's where I find myself now, sitting with these questions, letting them unfold without rushing to answers. I'm not advocating for one way of practicing over another. Each has its time and place, its unique wisdom to offer. Instead, I'm asking what happens to our sense of meaning, our sense of devotion, when the only witness is ourselves. What shifts when we realize that the only presence we need to answer to is the one that's always been there, patiently waiting for us to return? In that space, maybe the practice becomes less about improvement and more about presence. Less about being seen, more about truly seeing. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the deepest transformation begins. For a long time, my practice didn't really feel like it was just mine. It's an observation, not a complaint. When you're part of a community, or even just known in one as someone who practices, everything feels a little heavier. Sometimes it's a good kind of weight, but still, it's weight. I led a circle for a while. Funny enough, what really sticks with me isn't the rituals themselves, even though they meant a lot. What lingers is that constant little hum of self-consciousness, always there in the background. A sense that other people were watching, never harshly, just watching. Suddenly, what I did and how I did it mattered in ways that reached beyond my own experience. You start to question yourself in ways you just wouldn't if you were on your own. Am I doing this right? And I don't mean just following steps, but really, am I showing up in the way the moment needs? Am I setting a good example? Do I look like I know what I'm doing, or is it obvious I'm fumbling? And will that make people lose faith in me? Those questions aren't just about pagan practice or leading circles. Anyone who's ever led a group, mentored others, or just been known as a spiritual person has felt them. The whole dynamic changes once people can see you. Suddenly, your practice isn't just yours anymore. Whether you mean for that to happen or not, it just does. The weird part? Most of these expectations don't even get said out loud. Nobody sits you down to spell out what they need from you, spiritually. It just builds up on its own. Someone looks to you for guidance at the wrong moment, and you can feel the weight of it. Someone else has an idea of what your practice should look like, even if they've never said a word, and somehow you pick up on that too. Some expectations make sense. They're just part of sharing practice. But others are strange, or way too big, or honestly, more about who someone wants you to be rather than who you actually are. All of that changes you. Not always in a bad way, but there's no escaping it. What I've realized is that some of these questions are actually helpful. They keep you consistent. They hold you accountable. They make you show up, even on days you'd rather hide. There's a real gift in being witnessed, in having your practice wrapped up in something bigger than just yourself. That's important. But some of those questions sneak into places they don't belong. And they follow you into your quiet moments, the parts that are supposed to be just yours. There, they don't help at all. They just make noise in a space that should be peaceful. Being seen changes things. Usually, you don't even notice it happening until one day, the audience is gone and you're left alone with your practice. That's when you realize just how much of what you did was for someone else. Let's get something straight before we dive in. I'm not here to make a case for practicing alone. I'm not saying solo practice is somehow more real or pure than practicing with others. That idea sounds tidy, but honestly, it just isn't true. Some of my most powerful spiritual moments happened with other people around. And to be real, some of my emptiest experiences happened when I was all alone. Where you are doesn't automatically make the practice deep or shallow. So what does community actually offer? Well, at its best, it holds you up. When your energy runs out, when practice feels flat, or when you just can't get back into it by yourself, community gives you something to lean on. You keep showing up because other people do. You stick with it because dropping out would mean more than just missing a day. That kind of accountability matters. It's not about pressure, it's about having a structure, a kind of container that keeps the practice alive, even through dry spells. There's also a unique spark in practicing together that just doesn't happen when you're alone. When a group moves through something, whether it's a ritual, a prayer, a meditation, whatever it is, there's a feeling, a resonance that solo work doesn't touch. It's like being held by something bigger than just your own intentions. That matters. It's something worth caring for. And then there's the simple but powerful feeling of being seen. Having people who actually get what practice means to you, who ask how you're doing and really want to know, who notice when you're struggling or when something in you shifts. That kind of company is nourishment in its own right. But here's where things get interesting. Community brings out other stuff too, and it's worth paying attention to. When you practice in a group, it's never just for you. Even in the kindest, most supportive community, you start to wonder how you look to others. Am I doing enough? Am I showing up in the right way? Does my practice fit in, or is it going to stand out in the wrong way? Some of that is in your head. You invent an audience and start performing for them, even if no one's actually judging you. That's important to admit because sometimes the pressure isn't coming from outside. You're building it yourself and hanging it on the people around you. Still, some of it is real. Groups have cultures. They build unspoken rules about what good practice looks like, how committed you're supposed to be, what it means to be serious versus casual. You pick these up without even noticing, and they shape you, sometimes for the better, sometimes in ways that make you shrink to fit what the group wants instead of what you really need. So let me say this as plainly as I can. Your needs matter. Even in a group, even when you're working towards something bigger than yourself, your own needs don't just disappear. They don't stop being important just because other people are there. If practice constantly asks you to push your own needs aside for the group, that's not sustainable. It's not healthy, no matter what tradition you're in. This isn't a black and white thing. Practice with others when that serves you. Practice alone when that's what you need. Move between them as your life changes. There's no one right answer about which is better because honestly, that's not even the right question. The real question is, what does your practice need right now? And are you honest enough with yourself to listen? There comes a point where something changes. Sometimes the community just fades away, or maybe you pull back, or life shifts and suddenly you're practicing on your own again. At first, honestly, it feels good. No one's checking if you show up or keeping tabs on how you're doing. You don't have to carry anyone else's expectations. You don't have to measure yourself against some group vibe or standard. It's just you and the practice, filling whatever space you give it. That freedom is real. Seriously, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's a certain lightness that comes when your practice only has to answer to you, when showing up and being real with yourself is all that matters. But then, something else sneaks in, and it catches most people off guard. The quiet settles, and you realize you're not alone after all. Here's the thing about that inner critic, that voice worrying if you're doing it right, if you're committed enough, if your practice measures up. That voice isn't something your community invented. Sure, maybe it picked up some of its vocabulary or worries from other people, but the core of it, that's always been yours. When the outside audience disappears, it gets harder to ignore what's left. It's a strange feeling, realizing that the judgment you thought was coming from other people, all those imaginary eyes, all those made-up standards, was mostly something you projected outwards. You took your own doubts and handed them to the people around you, then felt crushed by the weight as if it belonged to them. And as long as it seems external, you can manage it. You could perform, do well enough, quiet it down for a bit. But when you're alone, with no one to perform for, that trick doesn't work anymore. Now it's just you, and that voice that's always been yours. Nothing to bounce it off, nowhere to hide. That's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's even harder than dealing with outside pressure. I've noticed this in my own practice. When it's just me, no community, no leadership role, no one watching, the critic doesn't go away. If anything, it gets louder. Because now I can't pretend it's about anyone else. I have to admit what it really is. A standard I set for me, by me. Usually a standard I'd never demand from anyone else. If a friend described holding themselves to it, I'd probably call it unfair. That's what privacy exposes. Not just freedom, but vulnerability. The rawness of facing your own judgment with no excuse that the pressure is coming from somewhere else. You can't just silence the critic. That never really works. If anything, fighting it just makes it shout louder. The real work is simpler, but a bit messier. Learning to offer yourself the same honest, open presence you'd want to bring to your practice. Sitting with that voice, the way you'd sit with anything difficult. No performance, no collapsing under it, no pretending it's not there. In the end, the audience that matters most isn't always the people watching from the outside. Sometimes it's the one you've been carrying inside all along. So what happens when practice finally stops being a performance? I'm not talking about doing it for the group or for some imaginary audience or even for that inner critic who's been keeping score forever. What does it look like when devotion is just itself? I've been thinking about this a lot. I keep being reminded of something I mentioned before, the image of a table. Sitting down with whatever you hold sacred, the way you'd sit with a friend who knows you so well you don't bother faking anything. No script, no armor, just you, just presence. That image shifts when you turn it toward yourself. Because the same honest, unguarded way of showing up, not performing but actually living devotion, that has to be there for yourself too. Not as some spiritual badge or something you unlock after enough therapy or meditation, just the basic posture of a real practice, the kind that actually belongs to you. Here's what I mean. That across-the-table presence isn't just for your gods or whatever sits at the heart of your practice. It's for you, right in the middle of it. The same willingness to show up without needing to impress anyone. The same permission to be tired or lost or not totally sure what you're doing. The same honesty about what's actually true right now, not what you wish was true. Most of us are way more generous with that presence in one direction than the other. We'll show up for the sacred in our messiest moments, confused, grieving, exhausted, nothing to offer but ourselves. And we trust that it's enough. But we hardly ever give ourselves the same grace. We set standards for our own practice that we'd never force on anyone we care about. If it doesn't look or feel right, or match some high point from the past, we decide it doesn't count. That's worth paying attention to, not as some big personal failure, but as a habit that might be getting in the way. You don't have to earn practice. That's something I've had to learn bit by bit, and honestly, I'm still working on it. Not just from other people, we've talked about that, but from myself too. The practice isn't standing there with its arms crossed, waiting for you to be good enough to deserve it. It's not holding back until you get over your self-judgment. It's just there, same as always, ready for whatever version of you actually shows up. And the version that shows up alone, without the community, without the leadership role, without any of the outside structure that makes it recognizable to others, is enough. Not in some cheesy, put a sticky note on your mirror way. Just in reality. The practice that happens in the unseen room, only witnessed by you and whatever you're in a relationship with, is absolutely real practice. It counts just as much as anything public. Maybe even more, because that's the version that only exists because you chose it. No one asked for it. No one's waiting for it. No one will ever know whether you showed up or how hard it was to do it. It's there because you decided it matters. That's not nothing. Devotion that keeps going, even with no one watching, not even the inner critic, has its own kind of faithfulness. Not flashy or heroic, just steady and real. Honestly, in my experience, that's the kind of practice that lasts. Here's what I want you to remember. There's no single way practice should look. It doesn't matter if you do it alone or with other people. It doesn't matter if it's formal, casual, every day, once in a while, or what it takes out of you. There's no official version of devotion you're supposed to chase. Practicing with others is real. The teamwork, the energy, That feeling of moving through something together matters. It isn't less because you're not doing it alone. For a lot of us, a lot of the time, that's exactly the kind of practice we need. Practicing alone is real too. The quiet room, the work no one else ever sees, the choice to show up just because it means something to you is no less important just because nobody's watching. That's its own kind of faithfulness. Switching between the two, joining the group when that's what fits, pulling back when you need space, letting your practice bend and shift with your life, that's not you being inconsistent. That's you being honest. Honestly, what I hope you take away from all this isn't some big conclusion. It's simpler than that. Let your practice be what it needs to be, not what you think it's supposed to be. Stop grading yourself against what other people are doing, or what your inner critic says, or some old version of yourself who seemed to have it all together. The only audience that ever really mattered is the one that's been with you the whole time. Through the crowded seasons and the quiet ones. Through the practices that lit you up and the ones that just fell flat. Through your proud moments and the ones you'd rather skip past. That presence never wanted a performance. It never asked for one. It just wants you to show up as you are and where you are, in whatever space, public or private, you're practicing in today. That's enough. It always has been. If something here stayed with you, you don't need to resolve it. Let it unfold in its own time. There's also writing from this same place, brief letters on Substack, and longer reflections on Medium. I'm Veyrin Vale, and this has been The Hidden Threshold, a project of Obscura Meridian.